So thank you so much for everyone who's tuning in. We're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar, for this webinar, we asked Connor and Bob to share the story about their regional data portal. Unlike some cities, Western Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh actually have a data portal that encompasses their whole region and not just their city limits, which we think was pretty awesome. And so we wanted them to sort of share their story about how they pulled it off. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bob.
Thanks.
From Carnegie Mellon.
I'm at Pitt. I used to be there. Yeah, the Pitt people wouldn't like to hear that, Christopher. No, I'm at University.
University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and Connor is brigade captain with Open Pittsburgh, and he's on this call too, so he'll jump in as well. You want to say hi, Connor?
Oh, everyone. I'm Connor.
And so, I guess next slide, Connor. And so just made it through the introductions. So in my former role, I was brigade co-founder and ran the brigade until we made a recent handoff to Connor. And for the last year to 18 months, I've been pretty busy developing the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center project. I'll get into that here in a second. We'll cover areas of, I think a lot of this is going to be around how we're using open data in community engagement efforts and how the model looks for us here in Pittsburgh, and then get into some questions and answers.
And I'm Connor Sates-Bowen again. I just started being the brigade captain for Open Pittsburgh in, I guess, January of this year, so about 5 months ago. And I was actually really sick for most of 2015, so I woke up in like early December 2015 and said, "Oh, hey, we have a data portal." So some of this will be new information to me as well.
And so just as context, Allegheny County, our home county, is about 1.2 million people. City of Pittsburgh is the largest municipality, only about a quarter of that population, or 300,000 people. We've got municipalities that are less than 200 people. So we've got 130 in all, 42 school districts, tons of different public authorities, universities, nonprofits, and so on. And if we're trying to collaboratively tackle any of these regional issues that we have, like blighted and abandoned property, stormwater runoff, pollution in the rivers, air quality, you can't really do it unless you're doing it at scale. And so just doing open data at the city of Pittsburgh, for example, would mean that you wouldn't have access to a lot of the county data that the city relies on in this layered system that we have. You know, if we're trying to address and build a land bank in suburban communities, for example, I think 40 communities are trying to band together on land banking. If you can't share data, you're not going to get very far. So what we thought initially with this whole project was, let's start, looking at how we're actually going to address these problems at scale. And there hadn't been any real infrastructure for any data sharing other than the excellent Allegheny County Human Services Department's data warehouse, which is just fantastic, but it deals with personal data, to manage human services. They get data from like 10 or so different school districts around the county, state level data. So it's a great integrated data system. And I think we're looking to complement that with our work here. And so this whole project actually started with us coming back after learning about open data through some of our networks at the Urban Institute and talking about that openly here in Pittsburgh and kind of knowing the local political climate. I'd been working to help neighborhood organizations. Well, are we okay on the presentation?
Yeah, sorry, that was my fault. Okay. Hold on.
Yeah, so I can keep talking. So we've been working with a number of organizations here, community development organizations, kind of informal data sharing. I would get data from the city or the county and use it to understand, who owns properties in a neighborhood or who the housing speculators were. And so what frustrated me with that whole process was that there was no real infrastructure for data sharing. It was all handshake agreements, very informal. I didn't know if I could share it with somebody and I could trust them. So we were doing a lot of good work, addressing a lot of abandoned and blighted property issues, but couldn't really do it at scale. And so that was frustrating. But with the incoming leadership at the city, with Mayor Peduto, who actually put open data as a campaign item, and then the leadership of County Executive Rich Fitzgerald, they were able to come together and help us raise a bunch of money from the foundation community for the first 3 years of this. And so partners on the project, it's actually a partnership of the City of Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh, and Allegheny County. And the way we talk about this most often is in terms of infrastructure. So it's not just an open data portal as part of a data sharing infrastructure with the technology. We got a whole legal infrastructure that we put months and months of time behind and lots of attorneys. And then we're putting an infrastructure in place since we went live back in the middle of October for community engagement. I think I'm going to cover a lot of that today, but I'll give you some background here. So in terms of, before I start, so the funding for this came from Richard King Mellon Foundation, Heinz Endowments, and also the University of Pittsburgh. So the grants that we received for the first 3 years go to support the City of Pittsburgh with staffing support, and it also funded the Code for America engagement with the Fellows Program last year. Money went to the county to set up a whole performance metrics program along with their open data program. There's additionally staff at the city to support open data efforts, and then support from the university came to us both in kind for office space to cover a lot of the legal work that we never had to put in our budget, and a lot of our partnerships with the university's library. So we have staff support from the university for one research person, and then the foundation money funds myself and 2 programmers that are mostly on this project full time, plus expenses. So all in all, our rough annual expenses here at the university to maintain the data portal, handle ETL, handle a lot of the community engagement work is somewhere around $350,000, $400,000, I think is where we're going in year 3. We've got travel, consultants, IT infrastructure in that. So it's not cheap by any means. But there were things that we didn't have to pay for, like attorneys. And the attorneys were really invaluable because they put this agreement together between the city, the county, and the university, and what all of our responsibilities are outlined in, like a 20-page legal agreement that took a lot of time on this. We also have an agreement that allows us to add additional publishers. This is a lot less onerous. It's a 2-page agreement. So anytime a new organization wants to add data with us, and for example, we're going to be adding our first set of organizations this spring and summer. It's a 2-page agreement. They sign it, send it to us, and then we'll put them through training and show them how to share data. So being able to work at scale and being able to share data across multiple organizations is a key thing for us. If you go onto our site, you'll get blasted with this big honking end user agreement, which the lawyer said, we have to put it there as a click through and not as a link. So if anybody's wondering, that's what went into that. So that's the third piece of our 4-legged stool around legal infrastructure. And then the final piece of it is the data license on every data set. We like to have a data license. It's part of our metadata. It's right there on the site. And in the agreements that we have, if you don't license your data as a publisher, we can go in and put a license that you specified in your data deposit agreement. So we thought a lot about the legal framework for this. Next one, Connor. And all these agreements, I see a comment, these are on our site, except for the partnership agreement, which I'd be happy to share with you if you want to send me a note. My email's at the end of the slide deck. So in terms of technology infrastructure, we went through a whole selection process. We wrote a blog post to this extent. Our goal to be sustainable is to leverage as many existing resources as we can. Things like the lawyers, things like our data management experts at the library, things like office space that the university provides us here at the Center for Social and Urban Research. Those are all things that we leverage. And so we thought we could leverage the university's network operations center as much as we can. So when we went into the search process, we outlined some criteria, involved our partners in the project, thought about what technology was the best fit for our project and not what was the most flashy and best for the end user, because sustainability is such a big thing. So I mentioned this blog post is up on our site. We selected CCAN, and we received support from consultants, formerly at Ontodia, now at OpenGov. I think they were just acquired a few weeks back. So they've been really helpful in terms of us customizing, configuring the site, and answering questions as we, continue to work with it. And that relationship means that our staff can focus on ETL, and we're going to be publishing this open source ETL framework that we've been building with one of the Code for America fellows, Ben Smith-Gold. So look for that soon. And then we're going to make a big push into building tools for the community. So we're going to find those use cases, where data can make a difference, technology can make a difference. And, if it makes sense for us to build it and we have the capacity, great. But if it's an opportunity for community engagement with the brigade, we want to definitely take advantage of those things too. And then, so this is just a page on the site. So this is our most recent data set that I think broke records for us in terms of use. So working in partnership has been great. So the county and the city have been full partners in this. It's not that open data is an afterthought for either. I think they're heavily invested in this. They put staff support behind it. We've got great teams that we can rely on, to open up access to a lot of the internal data. So, we're supported by two wonderful teams at each of our partners. But that's the site, WPRDC.org. We're taking an agile approach. If you saw the site a month ago, you didn't see maps showing up on some of the pages, but now they do. So we're listening to feedback and doing some great things. And we are using CCAN. And so just as important is that legal infrastructure and the technology infrastructure, another part of the infrastructure is governance. And we've got 3 layers of governance. The first is kind of the executive leadership team, which is really the county exec, the mayor at the city of Pittsburgh, and folks that they designate to represent them on the project. And that's Deborah Lamb, Director of Innovation and Performance at the city, and the county manager, Willie McCain. So they come together with us. We make major decisions in quarterly meetings or more often as needed. Just work as a great team. We talk about things that we're going to do, get ideas, coordinate on so many different things. We also have our project team. So Laura Mikesel and Joanne Forrester, represented both at the city and the county respectively, have been great partners, and they lead the open data teams at each of those. And we talk frequently, in many cases it's on a daily basis. So a lot of that cross-agency coordination happens with that project management team level. And then the third layer of our governance structure is the Community Advisory Board, a group of folks that we can go to and just ask advice, like how do we get the community engaged? What kind of data literacy programs should we really look at in terms of models from around the country? So we've got folks on the advisory board that can help us with all those different things. How do we promote our events? Those are the kind of questions that we throw at the advisory board, and it's been beneficial there. The other thing the advisory board helps us with is, what are the biggest issues that we ought to be tackling? There's a lot of data out there. We don't want to just measure our progress by the number of data sets we publish, but we want to measure it by impact. So what are the issues that are most important to their communities, and how can we make a difference if there's an opportunity to do that? So if you have questions, just throw them in the chat, and I'll address some of these as we go through, or maybe at the end in Q&A. But one of the important things I think to take away from this today is, I think we're the first data portal. I mean, there have been others that have looked at doing things at a regional scale. Philly and Colorado are 2 that we look at early on. But I think the one thing that I bring into the mix is, having done this work for a number of years, helping people use data without any real infrastructure to speak of, I thought it'd be really neat to tie that data intermediary role that we played to an open data infrastructure like we built here to serve the region. And so the community practice I really look at as that data intermediary has been through the Urban Institute's National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership. And so if you don't have a partner in your city, you might want to talk about, look at some other cities that do have these data intermediaries through NNIP, and there are about 30 cities that get together a couple times a year. Christopher comes to these. It's really beneficial for us to kind of understand, what's happening in the community. Are there interesting applications of data, interesting research we can draw from, And then, getting into things now recently has been great. Like, how do we work with the civic tech community as a data intermediary? Those have all been great discussions to be part of. And I think if there's an NNIP partner in your city, you should reach out to them and make sure that they're involved in your work in the brigade, because I think it will strengthen everybody. And so the key challenge for us, though, is, how do we inform policy and decisions using information and tech? And so it's like, finding where the values are. How can using information impact the community in a positive way? We can sometimes be a cheerleader. How can we generate demand for data and tools? How do we supply data in the right way to meet demand? I think how you publish matters. It's not just enough to put a data set up on a website. Putting it out in machine readable format is great, but if you don't have a standard ID across multiple data sets that are all about the same thing, like property information, the data becomes less useful. So those are the kind of things that we look at. And then, when it comes to, being able to engage the community in our work, it's looking at capacity. Like, we've got some capacity internally with our programming staff and some of the project staff that we have, to manage events, but are there partners that we can pull into the work to leverage that capacity? If we're going to be sustainable in the long run, and it's really important for us to be involved with a lot of different things and be indispensable in this work. So. And so just to kind of unpack this data intermediary phrase, it's really all about, doing a lot of things the brigades really try to do. So there's a lot of synergy there. It's making data available, discoverable, accessible, and easy to use. We act as community organizers, and I'll give you some examples of how we do that. We're cheerleaders for data, so going into a meeting with, nonprofits that you've been working with for the last 4 years is a lot easier to suggest uses of data if you built that trust over time. We also, in this partnership, can go and represent ourselves as the data user, in this partnership. So I can go to the city and county and say, hey, this is why it's really important that you make this data set available as the highest priority, or can you improve the quality of this data set by standardizing, a certain field or cleaning up, one of the really messy fields in the database, and we'll work with them on that. Data intermediaries also, really bring context to data, and I'll talk to you about some examples of how we're doing that. And then, just providing general technical assistance. We get, several questions every day, everything from, hey, I want to use data in a school project, but I don't know where to start, or I want to ask you a specific question about this data set. Those are the kind of things that we get into in our work. And so institutionalizing that kind of an approach, I think, is really important and strengthens a lot of the other actors in the ecosystem, like the brigades. So one of the things that we started with this, and we're just experimenting and making things up, but the observation in doing this a lot was that people just didn't talk to each other about data. There was no place for a specific data conversation in the community. It's like you could go to a meeting about vacant property, and maybe for 10 minutes we talk about data, but we never talked about data the whole time. Or people working in, with the same data set in 5 different neighborhoods never talk to each other. I mean, we've had 9 different neighborhoods implement different versions of property data collection tools, different data standards, data structures, so it was pretty clear to us that nobody was talking to each other. So we thought, well, let's just organize these open meetings. Anybody can show up and talk about data specific to a topic. We did. The first one was around environmental justice. The second one was property data. We're going to do one next week on sort of water and green infrastructure data. So just getting these people together that have the same needs but don't necessarily talk to each other that much, it's a great feedback mechanism for our work and the work of our partners. So, I'll walk you through some examples of just kind of how this feedback has helped us build tools, develop programs, prioritize data releases, and improve data quality.
And parenthetically, it was at the property users group meetup where the seed for the most recent Open Pittsburgh project started, which was a off-the-cuff remark about how a lot of people in Pittsburgh give directions by only using landmarks that no longer exist, which make them pretty unhelpful directions. And then someone said, wait a second, we have enough data that we could actually probably map those out. We could assign them to the parcel numbers. We could set up driving directions. We could do this automatically. So that's a project now.
Yeah, and so just some examples of this. So from the property data user group, we heard from a lot of people that were really probably use computers mostly for email and, writing text and documents. And they were like, I want to be a data user. I've been to so many presentations that say data is useful in my work and here's how I can do this. And I don't know quite where to start. And so since we got some great partners at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, who actually have a grant from a separate foundation, to improve community data literacy around open data, we said, hey, why don't we partner on a Data 101 training series? We surveyed, some potential participants at the user group meeting and just said, hey, when do you want us to have these things and where do you want it? And what kind of things do you want to learn? And so we're going to hold the first one next week, and it's going to be all about just the basics of data visualization. No computers, just really working with one of our consultants who's done a great job of just talking about the potential of data visualization and how you can think about making your data into pictures. I mean, that's a good first starting point. And I think the goal of this is after people go through this, and we're going to target nonprofit staff, library staff, public employees, students, maybe interns from different universities. Just get them some basic skills, get them confident so that they can take the next step and maybe, I want to go to an evening map time. This mapping stuff is great. Or I see that there's a Tableau workshop being offered by a tech organization, and I feel like I've got enough capacity that I can go there and not be completely lost. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is really get people going. And we wouldn't have known to do this unless we heard directly from the users at this user group meeting. And then the second piece that we heard from our environmental justice group was these were pretty savvy science users, or people that were pretty familiar with the science behind air quality information. But they said, I don't know quite how to explain this to people in my neighborhood who, don't know what a PM 2.5 actually means for their health. And so we're partnering with the National Academy of Sciences Ambassadors Program here locally through one of our staff, Mike Blackhurst, who's a member of that, to actually do some science communication training with, folks from the community. So we'll talk about what, the impacts of air quality data are on health of people in the community, and then walk them through some workshops, and so it's going to be mini presentations followed by workshops. And so what we're going to be able to do here is just say, hey, here's how you can interpret scientific data, here's where the uncertainty lies, here's what all these different things that are actually measured mean, so that when somebody looks at that data on the data portal and it's updated every hour and you can see like what's measured at all the different county monitoring stations, you can understand what you're actually looking at. Because I'm one of those people, I'm like, I don't know what this means, but it's great data to somebody. It's just, I can't quite interpret it. So that's the second thing that came out of one of these user groups. So we treated them as listening sessions. The third thing was back to the property data user group. Our assessment database is now available online. That's a big database. There aren't any neighborhood codes to it that mean anything to anybody. And so if there's somebody that doesn't quite have familiarity with desktop GIS, downloading a CSV file with 500,000 plus records in it, it's too big for any of the free online software to do anything with. And so somebody would probably spend about 15 to 20 minutes of time, actually extracting just that data for their own neighborhood. So one of the things we did is we forked Chris Wong's great parcel downloading tool from the Pluto data in New York City, and then using some of the funding to buy a CartoDB license, forked it here so that anybody can go into this site and download just an extract of that big giant data file in just a few seconds and put it into different formats. And so this is one of the things that just this listening session of organizing around user groups has really helped us build products that meet the demand out there. And so, the goal with that tool is actually to add more data to it and link data. And as we get more data in with the right parcel IDs, we can link more data so people have a real-time way to do this stuff. Oh, you didn't have to go back there, Connor. So another thing that we've done is, and this is, I think, a perfect brigade opportunity. If you're looking to do a city camp, this might be an activity that you want to consider. It's not enough for a lot of these data sets to just have metadata, because there's a lot of tacit knowledge that you need to have to be able to interpret it properly. And so what I try to do over the years is just pick a couple of data sets that I knew pretty well. and interview the data stewards on these things and just develop a shared document that we could do, asking what are the most common questions that you have, or me having worked with the data, I have some background on like, okay, what does this field mean and how is it collected and why does this exist this way, or what does the business process look like? What standards is this based on? And then I could even throw into the mix some suggested uses. And so this documentation at this kind of level of detail can really support additional data users. It can also relieve the burden of answering the same question over and over from the data steward. So I think it's gone pretty well. We've done it for 2, and I think we're actually looking to maybe partner with journalism classes and have them have this be a student activity. So just a snippet from the 311 user guide based on an interview that we did with the data steward at the city, Wendy. So it was like, how does this whole thing work? And with the county responsible for some roads and the state responsible for others, we've got 2 different water companies. Like, how does this all work? So the city's 311 system, and I could read this back to you, but I'm not going to do that. But it was just like, okay, how do you work with these other systems out there? So if I'm interpreting this data and I don't see any requests to repair this one pothole on this bridge that I knew about, it's because it's a state bridge and the state system doesn't relate to the 311 system, and there's no easy way to make that happen. So, that stuff helps you as a data user, and that's kind of how I think of our work representing and supporting other users of data in this way. Anybody using these yet, Connor? So we did it for 311 and assessment.
Yeah, so usually when I'm reaching out to community groups and I'm showing them different data sets that are on the portal, one of the things that they always get really excited about is, oh, like someone actually went through and wrote down what all these things mean to a human. Because you can kind of read what different column headers mean, but when you actually have like a real user guide, where someone has explained in plain English what these things are, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so I'd love to see other brigades pick that stuff up. And then just some other ways we connect with users. And these are all things we measure through our performance management framework, which actually I probably owe people a blog post on. How many presentations and meetings do we do? Doing guest lectures and classes really drives a lot of the student activity. Being involved in community projects and issues, attending other events, like we had a Policy Link workshop here a couple of weeks ago. We made sure we were there to just listen and hear what the community was talking about, see if that gave us any ideas about how to use data to support the work of the good organizations that we work with there. And then just a lot of technical assistance, answering questions all the time, multiple times a day. And then, another part of this building an ecosystem with this intermediary role in mind is a lot of what we do is connect volunteers to each other. So, along with Open Pittsburgh, we had a separate student group at Carnegie Mellon startup just this year, and they've got like 100 or over 100 students from multiple disciplines and really talented students, but not at all connected to the community. So we said, why don't you just do shared programming with Open Pittsburgh? I pulled some money out of our budget to support some of the events. And it's been great. You've had people in the same room as students from the brigade, and lots of stuff developed there. Incubating map time, and then connecting a lot of this work. And Connor goes to these, monthly work nights at the Code and Supply, which is a huge cross-disciplinary tech meetup that we have here. So lots of partnerships, but it's just kind of letting people know, hey, you should go to this, or you should talk to this person who's in charge of that. And I think there's been some great things there. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the Open Pittsburgh collaborations, Connor.
Sure. Code and Supply is pretty huge. I'll Google it right now. But there's quite a lot of coding going on in the city. There are a lot of people who are trying to push Pittsburgh to be the new Silicon Valley or something like it. So there's just quite a lot of tech startups, and there's quite a lot of recent university graduates who are looking into, like, what do I do now? So it's big enough that there is a 2,212 person member group called Code and Supply that runs probably about 25 events a month in the city. So one of the things that we started doing is having an outpost at their monthly build night, just so that we would be able to provide the Open Pittsburgh members with an additional amount of structured work time, and also so that we could start reaching out to people in code and supply who hadn't really heard about civic data or these, or any of the data on the web portal. And that's been very fruitful. We started doing the same thing with the SUDS, the Students for Urban Data Systems group as well. And there seems to be quite a lot of cross collaboration. And as someone who attended Carnegie Mellon and is always trying to get Carnegie Mellon students away from campus, because staying on campus forever is not the right way to live in Pittsburgh. The city is much cooler than the campus is. It's been awesome to see these student groups actually leave campus and venture out into the city. And that is, that'll have outcomes in the future that are unpredictably good, because it means that they might actually stay. They might get their amazing Carnegie Mellon computer science degree and then choose to stay in Pittsburgh and use it here. So that's the long-term goal.
Yeah, I think connecting those volunteers, not only to each other, but to organizations like the SUDS group is down and kind of working intensively in one neighborhood, Hazelwood, where actually you live, Connor, trying to develop some projects with organizations there that, are really small scale and don't have a lot of capacity, but, just kind of being the one who can shepherd those relationships is really an important thing to have in your community. We back out at the Code for America Summit last year started to map out different pieces of the civic tech ecosystem, and I want to get back to that, but I've been having a lot of conversations about, what makes for a good student project, or what makes for a bad student project, or what kind of projects are great for a brigade, or what kind of projects really need something else. And so kind of mapping out those different players and pieces in the ecosystem is something that I want to get back to. But I think in terms of advocacy too, I think having that data intermediary who can build trust with the public sector agencies, but also kind of let folks playing that outside advocacy game know where to insert themselves, or where their potential allies are, is really important. I know that there were some issues around what is and isn't published in some data sets, and I can completely understand with people wanting to see more. But what I can do is just say, hey, these are the same people that you should talk to because they have the same concerns. And here's the path forward in terms of whether it's a legislative process or approval or, something like that. Those are the kind of things that intermediation can do. They're not necessarily going to be an advocate, but they can at least kind of make the connections between you and others, and also give you a path forward in terms of working within the city or the county. And then the final thing that we do a lot of is just events around community engagement and data literacy, like Data 101 or participating in the Steel City Code Fest. Just kind of being involved in a lot of those different things just helps build relationships. So. And then just a few examples of our community interaction. One event that we're cooking up is around the crash data that I showed you a few minutes ago. And so this is going to be a partnership with the brigade, the city, the county, Carnegie Mellon, like Pittsburgh, and the Carnegie Library. And we thought, well, it'd be great to have not just throw this data out there for people, which happened, which is also fantastic, thanks to the hard work of the county. But it would be good to have like Pittsburgh be there to say, hey, here are the 10 questions we have about road safety in the city, and as data scientists, can you help us answer these things? There might be roles for people that can help build or replicate tools related to their Vision Zero approach here in Pittsburgh. And then the other thing that I'd like to pilot test is doing a crash data user guide by interviewing, the data steward at the state that puts this data together, but then also going out to some different jurisdictions and interviewing some police officers that are actually responsible for entering this data to see, are there certain types of accidents that you just don't ever record because it's such a pain in the ass and it takes you a couple hours to fill a crash report out. Those are the kind of things that we want to get into so that not only will we know how to use this data, but other people that'll pick up this data in the future or in other parts of the state will understand a little bit more about what it does or doesn't say. And then, being able to start these things at an event and then hand them off to people to show up at the next brigade hack night is a key thing. And those are all I think another example that you can talk a little bit about with the partnership with the Carnegie Library again, Connor. Where the oh god.
No, you were finishing a thought.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say hit the nice partnership their brigade has with the work nights at the CLP.
Yeah. The Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh system has something like 25 libraries in the city, maybe more than that. And they had a program that they started, I think, about 2 years ago, where they were trying to test out whether or not it made sense to keep some of the libraries open later hours, because most of them closed up. Most of them kept hours close to like banking hours, so they closed up at sort of 5 p.m. or so. And so the way that they tested this was they actually had sort of a roving work night, where one Thursday evening a month they would keep one library in the city open late, and see how many people came to that late night work night to do work at the library. And the Carnegie libraries have free Wi-Fi and plenty of power plugs and stuff. So bringing your laptop and doing coding there, or doing research or any other things you would do at a library were all things that you could do at these work nights. And so we started co-locating the Open Pittsburgh Civic Hack Nights at the same time and at the same place, which was great because it meant that the library got more people coming out to those events, and it also meant that the brigade was not tied to a particular neighborhood or like stuck in a particular part of the city. Those nights have kind of stabilized around one particular neighborhood that really they had the most success in terms of numbers of people who showed up for the work nights. So now from here on out, they're going to be at just one of the Carnegie libraries. But it was very cool to be part of that sort of test criteria series of events, and it worked out really well for most everybody involved. Yeah. So one of the things that came out of the crash data, which has been really helpful for introducing people who aren't really familiar with civic data into why this might be important, and something that the website makes very easy, the data portal makes very easy, is I usually use this example, which is the example of the sudden deer indicator. So this is a column that is in the Allegheny County crash data, and it is a 1 if a deer suddenly jumping onto a road was a part of the crash event that got recorded, and if it's a 0, then there was no sudden deer involved in those crashes. Interestingly, there's a couple other columns in there about whether or not deer were present at all or if deer were injured, because there are so there's the ability for this data to record crashes where like a deer freaked somebody out but wasn't, and was causal to the event, but wasn't actually like one of the things that got hurt in the crash. But deer jumping out into roads is something that is sort of a universal, that everybody in Pittsburgh who has a car or who has a bike or even who walks at one point or another has been startled by a deer suddenly jumping onto the road, because we have millions of them in the state.
One of them held last week. They took my wallet.
And so telling someone like, oh, like you don't know what civic data is. Well, did you know that they actually record all of the incidents where there's like sudden deer crashes? Being able to pull up the whole data set, you can do this on your phone, or at least I managed to do it on my phone once, but it's easier if you have a laptop or something. But being able to pull the data set up filter by the number of sudden deer incidents, and then show people a map of, and here's where they all are. If you're looking at this map, downtown Pittsburgh's kind of right in the middle, and the built-out part of the city is where, can people see my mouse? I don't actually know how the screen share works. And then the suburbs are this ring here. And so you can really see, this is the 2014 data, I think. You can really see the number of times that deer suddenly jump onto roads and are causal to an accident. There's very few in the city. There's one that is right here is where a highway actually goes over Frick Park, which is like a big public park. And then I think that's sort of the only one that's in the city. And then all of the other ones are very closely aligned to very fast highways going through slightly rural parts of the suburbs. And this is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. You can see is there's a ton of them. And so just picking this one sort of interesting but sort of random data point, and then that everyone has sort of a universal experience with, and then being able to quickly move from, well, here's the data, here's the filtered data, and now here's the map, and we haven't left the data portal yet. Here's a map of that filtered data. Very suddenly, people can look at that map of the filtered data and start making inferences based on what they already know about, that the city's really dense here, but there's a lot of forested land out here. But there are areas where there is both forested land and fast-moving highways and other roadways, and you can start to make correlations.
I think one of the things that I would take away from this is maybe we need to open community centers for the deer to keep them off the streets. Sorry. But I think one of the things, if I could jump in, Connor, one of the things that kind of guided our philosophy with our technology choice too was people want to use the tools that they want to use for data. So we didn't get too crazy with data visualizations embedded on the site. We realized, though, that people did want to see some basic visualization. So one of the things we have embedded is a OData link, and we'll show people as we go through Data 101 how to open a data set like this in Tableau Public and be able to do it without having to download the thing. Or, with the map, being able to open it right into your own CartoDB account to be able to do a quick map like this is pretty invaluable.
And a great example of people being able to pull the data down and then use their own tools to start interpreting it. There was a presentation at SUDS by a guy named Matt Burton, who's a researcher with the Pitt Library system. And he was showing a tool that he uses called Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter is based on the IPython project. The basic idea is that it shows you a web page that has code embedded in the web page. You can alter the code in the web page and have the web page refresh, and it's actually running whatever that code is on a Unix box somewhere in the back end, which is pretty cool because it means you can start interleaving the interpretation of your code and sort of the interpretation of the data sets your code is using with the code itself. And so in order to sort of show us this example of how this works, he actually put together a GitHub repo and then pulled a bunch of stuff into this data. And the data that he pulled in was actually the 311 data, and he was able to just download the whole thing as a CSV file. This is a link right here, so you can actually click through and do this whole thing for yourself. But he was able to pull all of the 311 data down as a CSV file, and then he started writing Python to interpret it. So part of that page is actually just a little snippet of Python code that he built that goes through the data, looks for the category neighborhood, merges together data that is from a single neighborhood, and then merges that together by the kind of issue that data represents, and then makes a drop-down menu so that you can actually choose between, say, the central business district and all of the data points that it has for 311 issues, and Belts Hoover, and any of the other 90 neighborhoods in the city. And just with this very light example, you can start, doing some pretty powerful visualizations. So you can see, for example, that road and street issues are almost always primary in every neighborhood. But for example, Bells Hoover does not have any 311 calls that were about taxes or back taxes. But I think, yes, yeah. Central Business District, which is downtown, does. It looks like they have almost exactly one or maybe two. And so this was great because this guy was showing the Students for Urban Data Visualization group this tool, these Jupyter notebooks, but he was using data that most of the people in there was already very familiar with, and he was able to just pull the whole thing down from the portal, throw it into a GitHub repo, and start working on it with very quickly and with no issues. And so it was a very cool thing to see, because it meant that he wasn't just giving a presentation about this tool out of context. He was actually saying, oh no, this is some data you've seen before, but have you seen it like this? And that worked very well.
And then just some reflections from my end with the regional data center is, this data intermediary role is really critical to the ecosystem. If you have an NNIP partner in your city, look them up. If you don't, think about who already plays elements of that role, and Brigade probably does play a big part of that in many places. But also think broadly about infrastructure. It's not just enough to talk about a data portal, but it's like, who's behind the data portal, who's going to publish data to it. The legal part of it is a big piece of the infrastructure. The people to organize events, the data literacy stuff, your library partners. That's all part of the infrastructure. But if you think about open data as infrastructure broadly, I think it will help you. Listen to everybody. So those user group meetings have been really invaluable listening sessions. Help guide a lot of our work that we've done since then. Learn from other cities, whether it's across brigades or other communities of practice. Experiment. We're making stuff up all the time, but share your work with others. So if it works or doesn't work, somebody should know about it. Track your performance. We have, like I mentioned, I owe people performance measures blog post. We track a bunch of things every month, related to just our basic activity, usage on the site, how many community meetings we do. And really, a lot of it's going to be tracking data stories like, okay, what happened as a result of publishing this data or holding this event? Leave time for reflection. It's really important to sit back and think about what it all means. And the final takeaway with Eleanor on the chat is librarians are really your best friends. And, our great friends at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh really handle a lot of the community engagement on the digital front door of Pittsburgh. But our librarians at the university library system are just as important. And I think Eleanor would back me up on this in terms of their data management expertise. Like, I didn't know a thing about metadata other than it was important until I walked into the university library, and then there's a guy there, Mike Bolub, who has metadata librarian on his business card. I mean, I didn't have to pay for a consultation with him at all. I just buy him a drink every so often. So that's kind of it from my perspective. And I can try to get to some of these questions in the Q&A or anything else that you might have.
So, first question, I think you've covered some of these, but what data license are you using for this data?
Well, it's really up to the owners to specify a license. However, we do encourage to minimize the restrictions or eliminate the restrictions of use, just to put everything out into the public domain with a public domain dedication. In some cases, we understand that there might be contracts that prohibit that, but what we try to do when we talk about licensing is talk about it from the data user's perspective. Like, if I build a website and you put an attribution link on it, and I'm using your data in a Google form or CartoDB, and I can't really put that license in there anywhere, it makes it really hard for me as a user. And so talking people through that really helps them understand, like, hey, less restrictive is pretty good. And I can see the value of that. But yeah, it's up to the owner, but I think the city and the county have primarily been using the public domain dedication. And I think the library is also going to do that when they add their data to the site.
Cool. Another question we had are, any thoughts on RDF, SKOS, or linked data?
That's where I turn to the librarians, and until they tell me, like, hey, this is really important, and start thinking about it, I'm going to just kind of go ahead and just focus on common standards for data identifiers. But, I've gone to one of the librarian data conferences, and it's interesting, but I keep going back to Mike and saying, hey, is it time to think about this yet? And he's like, just wait, or maybe if CCAN plugins are built in for that, then that might be where it comes into play. But I don't think we're quite there yet. It could be there, though. If we get into smart city data and sensor data and all this other Internet of Things stuff, that's where it's going to become much more important for our work.
So do you charge, the other question I see in the chat is, do you charge organizations to publish their data on the portal?
We do not. No, we don't want to put any barriers in place. I think, finding the value for those organizations, unless they're able to really see value up front, that, charging even a nominal fee would really prohibit that. And since we have the funding in place to be able to host data, and we're using, existing infrastructure, so it's not like we're bound by a contract that says we can only publish, 100 data sets until we reach that next tier of pricing. That was part of what went into it. We didn't want to have any restrictions on or disincentives to be successful. We don't care if a data set gets published by an organization it doesn't see a lot of use or value. We don't want to be the data police and say, hey, we're almost at the next pricing tier, and unless it's really important, don't share it. We don't want to do that.
Okay. Who pays for the hosting for the data?
That's actually paid through our grants, and so I think our data hosting costs are, like, from last I heard, under 10,000 or maybe under 5,000 a year, just because we're using the university's infrastructure. The cost for installing the portal software was just staff time. And then, we've got a contract with formerly Ontodia, now OpenGov, for trying to think of, low to mid five figures to help us with just fixing the portal if it breaks, or, if there are features like you saw the embedded data visualizations on the portal. That was stuff that they built through our contract, but it was something that they were hearing from other users. So it improves the product, and it improves it for everybody because it's open source.
Cool. So we have a follow-up question from Kyle. So the university hosts it. You're not using AWS or Azure. You're using CCAN. So
yeah, we have Red Hat on our server environment. So yeah, CCAN.
Cool. Bert is asking, do you see funding for the WPRDC as a long-term strategy?
It's going to have to be, because I want to keep buying groceries, and I got kids to put through college in a couple of years. But yeah, I think the sustainability thing is a really important piece of the project. And I think the first challenge for us is just to go and ship and be indispensable. And then the second challenge, over this 3-year period, is to be able to figure out, like, okay, what value are we providing? Who can we ask for support on this? I think, we'll be able to talk to our government partners, about providing continued support. We can go back to the foundation community with a smaller ask, but we can still ask, for continued support, since we serve a lot of their grantees. I think the state is moving into open data, so we'll see what kind of partnership opportunities are there. So our counterparts in Connecticut, at the Connecticut Data Collaborative, received a bunch of state funding to get their thing started. But I think it's going to be more, it's going to be incumbent on us to not rely on one source of funding. Another big source of funding here at the university is university grants. And so Mike Blackhurst, who's part of our team, is really just out there trying to use open data as part of grants. And so using that to, putting that into some of our funding, or approaching university researchers at maybe Carnegie Mellon that want to work with us, and just asking them to include us in a grant for a small portion. It's going to be kind of all those little things add up. And that's kind of how we funded it before open data, was just trying to put ourselves into as many grants as we can. Because it's really hard. But I think if we're trying to be sustainable, it's best to be pretty small, and to use existing infrastructures and existing people, and look for where the value is, and not just look to publish data willy-nilly, but to really provide value to the communities. It's going to be our big challenge.
Cool. So we're almost at an hour. We've gotten one more. I think we have time for one more question. We have Ali from Pakistan asking, all of what is being discussed here is based on a huge resumption and prerequisites of open data. Wanted to ask, what makes these partnering organizations willing to share their data? Is there an open data policy that makes it mandatory? Do you think we could do something like this without an open data policy in place?
It's really, you kind of take what opportunities come into place. In the city, we had an open data policy with Councilwoman Natalia Rubiak, and the mayor was supportive of it. It passed 9-0. The county doesn't have a policy or an executive order, but they're doing it because it's important to the executive to be involved with this. And there have been a lot of investments in the, in the existing human services data warehouse. And so we're trying to actually just make the case that it's valuable to share data. Looking for those stories and looking for those opportunities is going to help open up more and more data. And as we add new publishers, we're trying to do it around certain themes. So, with all the work around smart cities through Metro 21 and Carnegie Mellon, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here to actually put data on the portal from a number of transportation organizations. So it's like looking for those values. Not everybody's just going to share data for the good of it. I think it's going to be different based on the organization. But I think if you look for the opportunities and you're just ready to respond as quickly as you can when somebody says, hey, let's share data, or you start, I think the best way is actually to start with a conversation, say, what are your issues? And try to find a case study where, hey, just give me some data and I can solve it, and I don't have to put it up on the internet right now and scare the crap out of you. I think it's just like, that's how we started small scale and build a lot of trust. Like, hey, can I get the assessment data for this neighborhood? Because here's what I want to do around home repair services. Or I want to be able to identify, the property owners that are most delinquent in their property taxes and share this with, somebody else in a different neighborhood. Or, those are the kind of things that help. And having those informal conversations and starting small, and not starting with, you need an open data policy, but just starting with the value. And can I add value to your organization or your information in some way? Find those champions within the organizations, find the partners that they have. I mean, I was even doing things like looking at people's Facebook profiles and like, oh, when I'm going to meet with somebody, I can come up with an idea for the board that they might be serving on, as part of the conversation. Those kind of things matter. Just look for the opportunities, be strategic, and just be as responsive as you can. Don't scare anybody. It helps to just be helpful and, lead with their problems.
Great. That's awesome. So we're at an hour. So we're going to wrap this up. But thanks so much to Bob and Connor for sharing what they know.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And there's a bunch of stuff and blog posts on our site. And if anybody wants anything specific or wants me to follow up, be happy to just reach out through email or Twitter.
Yep. Thanks so much, everybody.
You take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone.